Hi everyone, I'm the Plant Propagator and welcome to my channel. If you like my videos and you want to keep on seeing them, it would help me out if you could click on like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Today it is a toasty day in Southwest Florida. It's still pretty early in the morning, but it's pretty humid and there's not too much wind blowing, and my orchids love it. Me, yeah, I love it too because my orchids like it. Anyway, what I want to talk to you today about is fertilizers, and I want to focus on orchid fertilizers. This is a video that I've been putting off for a long time, and it's because orchid fertilizers and fertilizer in general, even though it sounds like it might be pretty simple, it's pretty complicated. There are, three main components to most of the fertilizers, but then there are also all other components. So there's major components and then there's minor components. And some of the fertilizers are the things that are called fertilizers, additives. Some of those contain lots of other really interesting things. There's water-soluble fertilizer, there's time-release fertilizer, there's granular fertilizers, there's a lot of different things out there. And what I want to do today is focus mostly on the water-soluble fertilizers. And these are the fertilizers that I use. And as you can see, it's not just one thing. And it is, I understand a little bit about this area, but even for me, it's fairly complicated. So let's go through some things. I've got some stories that I can tell you, and let's see how it goes. All right, so the main fertilizer that I use is actually back here, and this is Miracle-Gro fertilizer, and that is owned by Scott's Miracle-Gro, which is a great company. It's the largest fertilizer company in the United States. It's a great company, as I said, and you can buy that product in most of the big box stores. The components of, and these are some of the other fertilizers. I have Jax right here, and I like using this. There is orchid-specific fertilizers that I have here. There's fertilizer, here's a fertilizer supplement right here, and I'll go into these in a little bit more detail in a little bit. The first thing that I want to show you is, I think, most easily seen on the Jax, and that is those three numbers that are on the front, 20, 20, 20 in this case, and those are the amounts of NPK, so nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And Jax is nice because it is an even balance of all of those different components. And the ways that a lot of these fertilizers differ, or what they want to tell you, is that it is in the NPK levels that are there. This fertilizer is a 20-14-13, and this is an orchid fertilizer that I actually like using this on the majority of my orchids. The Miracle-Gro, I think, is 24, and Miracle-Gro, it's interesting, they don't put those numbers right on the front. You've got to look on the back here. So I think it's 24, 9, and 16, but there's all different, all the different fertilizers will have that NPK level presented at that. In the orchid world, people like using what's called the MSU, Michigan State University formulation. And this was a fertilizer that was developed by colleagues at Michigan State many, many years ago. It's believed to be the premier fertilizer for orchids, but the interesting thing is, the reality of it is, it was not developed for orchids. It was developed by all the different plants. It was developed as, there are two major fertilizers, two major balances of NPK in their two fertilizer formulations, depending on where the water is coming from. And those formulations were developed for the plants that they happened to be growing in the MSU greenhouses at the time. So it wasn't really a fertilizer that was developed with orchids in mind. It happened to be adopted by the orchid community, and everyone uses it except me. I tried some. What I bought was expensive. It didn't work any better than anything else as far as I could tell. And so I used the more common, more economical fertilizers that are a little easier to access. But again, this was a fertilizer that was developed not for orchids, that for some reason has been adopted and used by the orchid growers. Again, this is Michigan State. They do grow orchids there, and there's a small effort on orchids at Michigan State as a result of this, but it wasn't developed for that. So one of the things about about fertilizers and using fertilizers on orchids is it's difficult to really determine what fertilizer is working best, because orchids just grow so slowly. So you'll get, a few on these plants, you'll get a little bit of growth, every week or every month or every year, even in the case of some orchids. So they grow very slowly. In most cases, it's difficult to see any kind of fertilizer benefit because the plants just grow so slowly. So, you try the fertilizer applications, and it's difficult to see what actually is going on, in your orchids. In nature, you look at this thing. In nature, where do orchids grow? Well, they grow when they're attached to trees. What kind of fertilizer do they get when they're attached to trees, when the roots are hanging out and they're just soaking in rainwater? Well, that's what they get, is whatever happens to be dissolved in the rainwater, which is not very much. So they don't need a whole lot. They grow very slowly. The fertilizer definitely helps. There's no question about that. It's taken up by the roots and helps. But in nature, you don't have that. You just basically don't have that. So again, a lot of people don't even use fertilizers. There's fertilizer. There's plants that are strapped to trees. There's native plants all over the place, and they're not really getting anything. They're getting some of the components maybe from the bark of the tree, but the components that they take up are from the rainwater, which means they're not getting a whole lot. They are getting stuff. There are elements clearly dissolved in the rainwater. Okay. So, there's not much there, and again, they benefit from having a fertilizer. Most of the other plants that are out there, and there are terrestrial orchids, but most of the plants are terrestrial. They're growing in the ground, and those plants take up their nutrients from the soil. Now, in the soil, you have lots of different fertilizers. It's, you have plants that are growing. You have the components of the soil. I'm not a soil scientist. I'm a plant scientist, but my department has soil scientists in it. And you can, so the plants will take up the various elements that are in the soil. And there's various components that make up the soil that make certain soils better for storing nutrients. And there's certain nutrients that are really readily available in the soil that are not nearly as readily available that when they're in trees, when they're mounted in trees, or when your orchids are in pots. And again, a lot of this also depends on with orchids, with the potting medium that you use. So, soil has some really good holding capacity for certain elements, whereas most of the media that's used for growing orchids does not, and you need to keep this into consideration when you use this. Now, how does that help you? I'm just kind of going around in circles here, and yeah, I am a little bit, but let's get back to the point. So I have to tell you a story about some plants that I was growing in soil in pots here around my house, and I was using Scott's Miracle Grow, or their moisture control potting mix, and I was also using the Miracle-Gro fertilizer, and I was growing tomato. The interesting thing is tomatoes are a model for nutrient deficiencies and seeing nutrient deficiencies in leaf tissues. When I was in graduate school, I taught a course on a plant physiology course where one of the components was mineral deficiencies in mineral composition. And we had one of the parts of the course was to, in the laboratory, we grew tomatoes hydroponically, and we had various fertilizers that we used. In the fertilizers, we had various jars that we were growing the tomatoes in, and we had various minerals that we intentionally left out of this nutrient solution in the hydroponics so that you could see very easily the mineral deficiencies that were there. So tomato is a really nice model for nutrient deficiencies. So I was growing the tomatoes around my house, putting it in the proper potting mix, fertilizing it routinely, and there was a mineral deficiency there. And it's like, holy cow, what is going on? What have I done? And so I looked at this a little bit more, and I looked up the mineral deficiency. It could have been one of two things, but I looked it up, and I had to remind myself of what the mineral deficiencies in tomato actually look like. And it's various. What you can see is in the leaves of tomato, because it really grows so rapidly, the mineral deficiency symptoms show up, and they're pretty easy to see. And what I saw in this tomato looked to be a couple of different things. It ended up being magnesium deficiency. And the interesting thing is you look at the label here, and not at the label in the back here. And what you cannot see here, but it does have the elements that are there. So in addition to NPK, there is boron, calcium, iron, manganese, molybdenum, and zinc. There is no magnesium in here. So I contacted the people at Miracle-Gro, as I tend to do. So I'll contact the manufacturers of these things, and they sent me a message saying, I asked them what's in there, is there magnesium in there? And the initial message that they sent to me said, this contains these compounds, and they mentioned all the ones that I just mentioned, and so, but not magnesium. And so I wrote them back again, because I've gotten some good response from them. I know people that are there. I wrote them back again, and I said, look, let me make this clear. Is there magnesium in there? I think I'm seeing magnesium deficiencies after I'm using your fertilizer on tomatoes. And they wrote me back regarding your question about magnesium, and this is written by William D. from Scott's Miracle-Gro, and he is a brand ambassador. Let's see, regarding your question about magnesium in the Miracle-Gro water-soluble all-purpose plant food, if magnesium were present in the product, you would see it listed among the other nutrients. And so, he said, yeah. He was a little rude, but that's okay. And then he says, we market a wide array of products to meet the needs of as many consumers as possible. And I asked him what of his products had magnesium in there, and says, since we do not currently have a master list of products that contain magnesium or any other specific nutrients, we recommend you check the ingredients and nutrient statements on some of our products. So he was too busy to look into this himself, so he said, you have to look at it yourself. So, I looked at things. I actually looked at the specific orchid fertilizer that Scott's Miracle-Gro makes, and magnesium is not in there. Now, if my tomato plants were in the soil, it wouldn't have mattered. I wouldn't have seen this because there's so much magnesium in the soil. But the problem was with my tomato plants is they were growing in a potting mix, and a potting mix didn't have any soil in it, and so I was using a synthetic potting mix, essentially a synthetic soil, with these fertilizers, and so I saw this magnesium deficiency that was in there. So what do I do? And so I learned from this, and I'm always learning with everything that I'm doing. The thing is, I learned in tomatoes, I didn't see any kind of deficiency in any of my orchids, but it may have been more difficult to see that. But again, the orchids are growing in a very synthetic potting mix. They're going in, in bark. They're going in lava rock, and what I use is lava rock, mostly lava rock and leca and a few other things. But they don't contain, anything that is going to hold on and release magnesium. So what I do now is I add a little bit of Epsom salt. And Epsom salt is, it's magnesium sulfate is what this is. So you can get this, and this is so cheap, so you can get this at the big box store. And I add about, not much, it's just a dash or a pinch. I add about a half a teaspoon. What I make up is usually 3 gallons, so you figure this out. So it's about 1/8 of a teaspoon per gallon or something like this. You just add a little bit of this if I'm using the Miracle-Gro. The interesting thing is when you look at some of the other fertilizers, so this also, Jack's also does not have magnesium. The Orchid, the Better Grow Orchid Plus does have magnesium, and you look around and you can find magnesium in some of these things, but I think it's important to have this. Now, what I do typically when I make up my fertilizer solution is I don't use one thing. So I mix a little bit of this with this. This is the main thing I use now, by the way. I mix. It's mostly the the Better Grow Orchid Plus. And I add a little bit of Miracle-Gro. I add a little bit of some other things that I'm going to talk to you about, but then I add the Epsom salt, the magnesium supplement. So I add all of these things together, and then I fertilize with that. So that's kind of a first part of the story here. What I want to talk with you today, now I want to transition a little bit now to supplements. And so there are some supplements so magnesium, I guess that's a supplement, but the reality of this is that it's in some of the formulations. So it's in this formulation, some of the time-release fertilizers that I'll get to in just a second have magnesium in there, but you've got to look at the ingredients carefully. Now, I don't think you're going to see this with orchids. The only reason I saw this is because it was the tomatoes, and the tomatoes were very fast growing, and I used an artificial soil mix. All right, so back to some of these things. So let's talk about supplements a little bit. And this is one of the supplements that I really like to use, and it's a lot of people use it. So this is a soluble, I hope you can see that, maybe you can't. This is a soluble seaweed powder right here. And the components of this, when you look at the NPK level, it's 0,016. So all it has is potassium in there, and it's potash is added there. And this is just it's a seaweed, it's kelp that has been treated a certain way to generate this, and it's black, and it'll turn, if you add this, it'll turn your fertilizer solution dark, and you gotta be a little careful with how much of this that you add. So it says 100% natural, 0,016. The reality of this, and I use this, and I just add again just a splash of this. Now this is just a dash that I add, and it's luckily it has one of the sides on the top here is a shaker. So I add just a little dash of this in order to just get a little darkening to my fertilizer solution. I add this mostly because my daughter said, and that is the Plant Propagator Junior said, to try some of this and add this, and she uses it for her vandas, and her vandas grow way better than my vandas. So okay, I thought I would try this supplement. I contacted the people at Nature's Pure Edge. I contacted the Nature's Pure Edge people. All these people they're happy to share certain information with you. And the guy from Nature's Pure Edge responded back to me, and he sent an analysis of one of the batches that he provided to me. So there's the main thing in there is potassium, and it's fairly high levels of potassium, but there's low levels of because it is it's kind of an ashed kelp. and it does have the, it does have a really dark green color to it. So really large amounts of that. It has low levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur. It also has low levels of other components. Let's see, sodium, zinc, calcium, magnesium, iron, manganese, copper, and boron. And because it is a plant, and it's a seaweed, but because these organisms are taking up these essential components that they need, they also store that in their tissue. So it has all of these components in there, and it's really, it's really interesting that it's there, and I add this. But the other thing, when you look to the literature on a lot of these seaweed-derived products, they also contain other plant compounds, and some of the compounds that they contain auxins and they contain cytokinins, and these are the hormones that are produced by plants. And you got to be careful with those. If you add them at levels that are too high, you'll get distorted plant growth. Hormones are made by the plants in very low concentrations, transported through the plants where, again, they have their benefit and their effect at very, very low concentrations. So you got to be a little careful with adding this, because they are essentially dried, concentrated plant extract, kelp extract, and you got to be a little careful not to add too much of this, because you can have distorted plant growth as a result of that. So it has auxins and cytokinins. It also has gibberellic acid. I was reading scientific reports in respectable journals by people that I know. So it's got gibberellic acid, another plant growth regulator. I saw a report that said it had abscisic acid, another plant growth regulator, and some other compounds as well. So, it contains these other compounds. Most people like to add it because they get vigorous root growth, which may be a result of the auxin type compounds. And auxin is what's in this rooting powder, and it causes root induction when you use this rooting powder for rooting of cuttings. But also you got to watch out with higher levels that the auxin will inhibit root elongation. So you got to, and then it will cause other effects if it hangs around too long. All right. So this is good stuff. I really like using it, but read the directions and be careful how much of this you add. One of the other orchid medium supplements that I've heard a lot of people use is Super Thrive, and I like saying that because I like saying Super Thrive. Anyway, Super Thrive is a product that it's been sold by many, for many years, and it doesn't contain very many of the classical nutrients, the major elements or the minor elements. But what it does contain, the main thing that they claim it contains, is vitamins, and it contains vitamin B1, which is thiamine, which plants make anyway. The other thing that it contains is naphthalene acetic acid, which is not the same auxin that's in here, but it contains auxinic growth regulators. Super Thrive, you got to be really careful about. Also, you got to add, just the right tiny amount of this stuff. They tell you add a drop, but a drop can be, big drop or small drop, and yes, it does make a difference. And I have never used it. I will not use it. I just don't think you need to use it. And it's actually, it's something I stay away from. But a lot of people use it. At the end of this, if you're successful using certain fertilizers, by all means, keep on using that same fertilizer. If you want a recommendation, you can listen to what I'm talking to you about. You can go to the American Orchid Society website, and they have fertilizer recommendations as well. Everyone will tell you they use something different. I've got some people that have told me that they love using the organic fertilizers, and by golly, keep on using those organic fertilizers if they work for you. Organic fertilizers is nice because they're kind of a time release. They're natural products, a time release fertilizer. And they're probably not going to burn your plants. Everything, you dump them on too much, it's going to burn your plants. But the organic fertilizers, go for them, try them, try all these different things. I really prefer the water-soluble fertilizer when I'm spraying my plants. I'm looking at my watch because I've been going on a little bit too long. I want to just touch briefly on some of the time-release fertilizer formulations. And the formulation that most people use is this, and this is Osmocote. And the interesting thing is Osmocote is made by the same company that makes Miracle-Gro. They actually own it, and so Osmocote is another Scott's Miracle-Gro type product. And this is also good stuff. I use this on my plants. I don't use this on my orchids because you look at the ingredients and it still doesn't have magnesium in it. But with all these fertilizers, there's so many different forms, there's so many different variants of the basic product that you can get all different types of formulations, NPK levels. You look around, you can find, there's major levels, but if you look hard enough, you can find all different balances. With my Orchid Plus that I get from Better Grow that I really like to use, there's the regular Orchid Plus, and there's Better Bloom right here. So this is a formulation that is supposed to be for better blooms, and there's bloom booster formulations, and there's all these types of things. And actually, I have it. I don't use many of it. If I do, I mix it, which kind of negates the benefit from having a certain ratio for NPK. Anyway, back to Osmocote. So Osmocote makes a Osmocote Plus that does contain magnesium. I haven't found that. This is what I find in the big box stores. I haven't found the Osmocote Plus in the big box stores. This lists on the label that it has a 4-month time-release formula, and there are also various time-release formulations for Osmocote. Again, this is the main thing that's out there. And this is released over 4 months at certain temperatures. At higher temperatures, it's going to be released faster, as you might imagine. What Osmocote is, as you might imagine, there are pellets of fertilizer that are coated with material that degrades slowly. So it's a time-release formulation. And there are 4 months, there are, I think, 6-month and 8-month and 9 to 12-month formulations of this that contain all different types of nutrient compositions. And again, there's Osmocote. There'll be a plus on the front that will contain magnesium. So there's all different types of formulations. What most people in the orchid community use is this stuff, and it's not in a container that says Nutricote on it, but this is Nutricote. And this is a slower release. It's a more balanced formulation. And the reason that this is in a large Jif peanut butter container is because I have colleagues that buy this in 50-pound bags, and we share. So if you're going to use, and usually what I do is I add a little bit of the Nutricote, and I add that to my regular fertilizer regime. So I fertilize once a week with a weak concentration of a mix of some of these different components. And then my plants are irrigated with well water once a week. The well water here is very good. And then every 6 to 9 months, I add a little bit more of the Nutricote. And this Nutricote is a very slow release. Nutricote is more releases over time. It's not as dependent on temperature fluctuations. In high temperature, it really doesn't impact as much the release of the fertilizer from the Nutricote. Nutricote is a little bit harder to find, and that's unfortunate for right now. Okay, so that's all I have for today. Thanks for watching. I appreciate all the suggestions that you've given me on fertilizers and content that you want to see on my channel and everything else. I hope you stayed with me. Like I said, I hope you enjoyed the video today, and happy propagating.